Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, The New Kid on the Blockchain. My name is Chris Elias. I'm the practice leader of the Web3 and FinTech practice for LegalVision, and I'm joined by my colleague and fellow Web3 enthusiast, Robert Chen. So basically, Rob and I have been working with a number of Web3 clients, ranging from gaming companies, exchanges, a range of NFT-based projects, private token sales, public token sales, DeFis, DAOs, and I think I've captured all the acronyms there. So it just gives you a sense of the type of work that we've done. Today, we'll be going through the following topics, and which will start off with an overview of the existing laws that apply to Web3. The second being the proposed new legal framework that is currently under consultation. Then the implications on your business and steps you can take. And finally, we'll wrap up with some risk mitigation strategies. So it was funny, I was speaking to a friend about this and about the new laws coming in, who he's quite active in the Web3 space. And he told me bluntly that compared to all the cool things that are being built in Web3, Chris, the regulations just aren't that interesting. Now, while I still maintain that there are some legal areas that are interesting, he does sort of have a point. I mean, ultimately, these laws and our role as lawyers should be to help builders and creators in Web3 and make it easy for them to create game-changing products. So hopefully, that'll be the tone of this webinar, and hopefully it'll help you, the creators. So basically, at the end of the webinar, we'll be answering some of your questions. So please feel free to submit your questions through the webinar chat function, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end. And of course, thank you again all for joining us today. I know you're all very busy, and yeah, very much appreciate you spending time with us today. All right, let's dive in. So the first topic we'll be covering is an overview of existing laws. Now, I think it's important to start off with a bit of context. So over the past decade, the government has attempted to foster innovation and create a strong, vibrant ecosystem. In particular, Australia has done a great job of creating a strong fintech sector. Now, this could be attributed to Australians' apparent obsession with finance, but also the government's lowering regulatory barriers to enable startups to provide innovative financial services to consumers. In light of this, it should come as no surprise that, generally speaking, the Australian regulatory landscape is quite friendly and stable for Web3 businesses. For the most part, the government has attempted to intervene as little as possible and has taken actions to work collaboratively with the Web3 industry. Now, despite the government's best efforts, there is still a high degree of regulatory uncertainty, which can be a significant barrier to entry and also even limit innovation and consumer protection in the space. Now, let's go through the three main regulatory frameworks that Web3 businesses need to consider. It's important to note that these regulations are technology neutral, and there are currently no new laws that regulate the Web3 industry specifically. This means that in order to determine which regulations apply, Web3 businesses and lawyers need to assess what the business does and how it uses the technology, which can, of course, be quite complex, as I'm sure you all can appreciate. Okay, let's kick off with the first main regulatory framework, which is the Australian Financial Services Law. Now, this can be the most complex, and generally, this governs how financial products and services are issued and distributed. One of the key questions Web3 projects need to ask themselves is, am I providing a financial product or service? Now, the definition of a financial product is quite broad, and as a result, can include some Web3-based products and services. The financial product is broadly defined to capture a wide range of financial instruments and arrangements. Generally, a financial product is a facility that enables a person to make a financial investment, manage a financial risk, or make a non-cash payment, or NCP. So let's go through those in a bit of depth. If a person, so for making a financial investment, this occurs if a person contributes money or money's worth to generate a financial return where the contributor does not have day-to-day control over the contribution. The second, managing financial risk, basically occurs if a person manages the financial consequences or avoids or limits the financial consequences of value fluctuations. And finally, NCPs, this is where a person makes a payment or cause payments to be made otherwise than through the physical delivery of Australian or foreign currency. For example, your typical payments technologies. So as you can see, the number of Web3 projects have some elements of finance as part of their operations and offering. So for example, private token sales, staking, speculative investment opportunities, and as a result, this can capture a large number of Web3 businesses. This means that, for example, selling your NFT images of cartoon apes might also be considered a financial product, depending on the rights and benefits attached to that NFT. There are common financial products that Web3 businesses need to be aware of and need to determine whether they are or are not providing these financial products, which include securities. So if your NFT or crypto asset looks a lot like a share in a company, interest in a managed investment scheme. So basically an arrangement where people can contribute tokens or something of value to generate a financial return. And finally, a non-cash payment facility, for example, pay with crypto type services. So there are also a number of exemptions that might apply. This, is typically available for foreign entities and value-based exemptions. But unfortunately, making this determination is not simple and will depend on the facts and details of your offering. So sorry to be too lawyery there. The second key regulatory framework to consider is the AML-CTF laws. Now, if you provide a designated service, which is a list of services set out in the AML-CTF Act, essentially is where, a service that moves money around, you will need to comply with the obligations set out in the AML-CTF laws and also register with AUSTRAC, being the regulator. There are a lot of designated services, so we won't have time to go through them all today. We'll just basically talk about the primary service that applies to Web3 businesses, which is a digital currency exchange, or DCE. A DCE is essentially services that exchange digital currency for fiat money or vice versa, where the exchange is provided in the course of carrying on a digital currency exchange business. This includes exchanges in Australian or foreign dollars. Now, this usually applies to crypto exchanges, trading platforms, crypto on-ramp, off-ramp services, and crypto wallets, but may also include other Web3 businesses where there is an exchange of crypto assets for fiat currency or vice versa. Generally, the obligations of DCEs are not particularly onerous, as DCEs will be required to implement KYC processes to verify customers' identity, provide ongoing reporting, such as annual compliance reporting, and the requirement to monitor and report suspicious and large transactions. There are also some record-keeping obligations and the renewal of registration every 3 years. Finally, there is the Australian Consumer Law. Now, I won't spend too much time on this as it's relatively straightforward, but basically these laws apply to all businesses who provide products and services to consumers. At a high level, the ACL prohibits misleading and deceptive conduct, particularly in marketing and promotional activities and unconscionable conduct to ensure that crypto assets that are being sold are fit for purpose. A key area that's receiving a lot of attention at the moment is the misleading and deceptive conduct through marketing, the marketing activities of Web3 businesses. Now, I mean, I've worked with a lot of startups in my time. I've even had one of my own. So I know firsthand the pressure of founders to oversell what they have. Now, I guess my general advice is based on the nature of Web3 businesses and the market conditions, it's important to sort of water down that marketing and make sure that it's, I guess, more reflective of reality there. So just keep that in mind. The regulator has also provided guidance on what may constitute misleading or deceptive conduct with respect to the sale of crypto assets. Here are some examples. So the first is using social media to create the appearance of higher levels of public interest. The second is creating the appearance of higher levels of trading activity of a particular crypto asset. Another one is not disclosing appropriate information about the crypto asset sale. Or a final one, suggesting that the crypto asset sale is a regulated product or endorsed by a regulator when it isn't. So please keep this in mind next time you are selling and promoting how amazing your products and services are. Okay, so I probably know what you're thinking, and it's where is tax law? We haven't covered that. And sorry to break it to you, but we will not be going through tax law today, as that would require its own separate webinar. So yeah, we'll leave it at that. So now that I've kind of taken you through the existing legal frameworks that apply to Web3 businesses, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Rob, who will take you through the proposed new approach and new laws that are currently under consultation.
Thanks, Chris. And that's a big no-no from me as well in relation to tax. But before I launch into it, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which I'm presenting on, that is the Gadigal country, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So the proposed approach by the government came in the form of a consultation paper, which was published early this year in March, and actually coincided with the first day of the Blockchain Australia Week. And what that consultation paper does is it sets out an overview of the proposed approach to regulating crypto asset secondary service providers by setting up a licensing framework and then opening up the discussion for custody requirements for crypto assets as well. And to Chris's point a little bit earlier, the important thing to take away from this is that the government has opened the floor up for industry participants like yourselves to put in your thoughts by way of submission. So it's a good thing. And the government of the day will need to know the commercial and practical realities of Web3 businesses having to comply with or meet proposed any regulatory approach. And so hopefully with enough voices from the industry, we could get something like a light touch, flexible approach that is conducive for Web3 to thrive in Australia. I think with that said, it could also potentially look like an industry-led approach that could be self-regulating, but the consultation paper does draw attention to some of the risks that CASSPR or Web3 businesses will need to consider in such a way that such Web3 businesses can then prepare as well as possible for these laws. So to dive straight into it, it's going to, what it looks like is a licensing framework and custody requirements, which are being proposed for crypto asset secondary service providers, which have been coined as CASSPrs. And that will be an umbrella term to cover service providers who do things like provide custody and storage for crypto assets, exchange, brokerage, and dealing services, as well as operating a market. So how do you know if you or your business will be considered a CASSPR? Well, if you do any one or more of the following, if you exchange between crypto and fiat, if you exchange between one or more types of crypto assets, if you transfer crypto assets, if you safekeep virtual assets or instruments which enable control over crypto assets. So that usually covers your exchanges, custodial wallet services, NFT marketplaces and platforms that facilitate the issuance and secondary sale of NFTs, or if you participate in and provide financial services in relation to an issuer's offer and even the sale of a crypto asset. So if you tick any of the above boxes, then you're likely going to be a CASSPR and fall under the fold of the proposed approach. So on our take of the consultation paper, what we can expect is a principles-based approach. And there's going to be two key elements to this. One, it's going to be risk-based and proportionate to the risk presented to the consumer. And this will look somewhat like a sliding scale. So if you are going to be someone a business who has custody of a significant holding of assets, then you're going to likely have to comply with more obligations under that licensing framework. And the second one, in echoing Chris's point a little bit earlier, is that it will be technology neutral, which will allow the various parts of the Web3 ecosystem to continue to evolve competitively. So as a business, you want to understand how you can best prepare for any proposed regulation. And the way to do that is have a look at the consultation paper, but also have a think about why. Why is there a need for regulation? Well, it's simple. You know, with the growth of the crypto industry, particularly in the last few bull runs in 2017, last year with NFTs, there's a great deal of risk that's being carried not only by service providers like yourselves operating in a somewhat unregulated environment, but more importantly, the consumer. So your average Joe Blow who has invested their life savings into Terra Luna and has literally seen that gone to zero and now can't make their bank repayments. Or your average Laszlo who goes down to Papa John's and buys 2 pizzas when 10,000 Bitcoins. Although to be fair, that very well could have been me. But ultimately, the point is there's a huge risk to consumers, and that risk is one of financial loss, which is why CASSPrs, if you are one, will need to think about the types of risks which you have control over and which you can mitigate. So look at things like your operational risks. Have you considered provisioning for business continuity, whether that's short-term, long-term? Have you provisioned a buffer for when things go wrong? What's your risk of liquidity? And do you have enough capital? And that's corporate capital, not consumer capital, to avoid insolvency risk. Have you considered fraud and key personnel risks? Are you vetting your management? And then Chris flagged this a little bit earlier, misleading and deceptive conduct risk. And that could be as close to your heart or as close to the core of your business as your white paper. And that's something we can help you review as well. And finally, cybersecurity, which remains a huge risk to all businesses, whether you're a Web3 business or not. But this is quite interesting because over the last few weeks, there's been a recent federal court case, the first of its kind actually, which has held an AFSL holder had breached its AFSL license obligations to act efficiently and fairly due to a number of data breaches it had suffered. And you'll see as this presentation goes on why that's relevant. So understanding and thinking about the risks will inform what you can do as a Web3 business to prepare for any proposed laws. So when we're, like I said a little bit earlier, this framework is going to target consumer-facing CASSPrs, and that's because all that risk is at that point, that interaction with consumers. So there will be one type of license from what we can see, and that's the CASSPR license. And there will be varying degrees of conditions, responsibilities, obligations attached to that license. And what CASSPR license holders need to do is either they're going to have to comply with or implement those minimum standards for conduct in relation to those interactions with consumers, as well as custody requirements for crypto assets. So for example, when you're generating and storing private keys, how are you doing that? Before I go further, I do want to clarify that this proposed framework will likely coexist with the current financial regulatory framework, which Chris has discussed. So if you already have an AFSL or an Australian market license, chances are you will likely already have to meet a number of the minimum standards of conduct in this proposed approach. But the short of it is, if it is a crypto asset where the existing framework applies, then that framework will continue to apply. And where the crypto asset isn't a financial product, for example, then and doesn't fall under the fold of the existing framework, then this regime will apply in terms of licensing. So let's go through some of the minimum standards of conduct. We won't get through all of them in the interest of time, so we can get through some questions. But I'll touch on some key ones here. And the first one is, you've got to do all things necessary to ensure that the services covered by CASSPRs under the license are provided efficiently, honestly, and fairly. And that ties into that AFSL case that I mentioned a little bit earlier. This is a broad obligation or broad license condition and is likely to be construed quite broadly by a court as well, not too dissimilar from the existing AFSL requirements. The next is to actually maintain adequate technological and financial resources to manage risks. So make sure you're allocating capital to risk management, engage third parties, certified third parties to do audits and do multiple audits, two or three audits on security, particularly your smart contract security. Prepare a risk management plan, do regular tune-ups. The next one is you need to have adequate dispute resolution arrangements in place, and that's internally and externally. And this really could start with a complaints policy, which we can assist you with, and which customers will start at that point in time and then escalate any issues through a internal disputes framework. You can lay that out in your terms and conditions, and then pop out the other end. Parties either go to mediation or go to court. So it's quite important you do have a look at terms and conditions. Next one, directors and key persons need to be fit and proper persons, and that's a legal test. So some of the key red flags here are if a director or person has been previously disqualified as a director, or if they've received a banning order. And you can look this stuff up, and that's very much consistent with the current framework. The next two are quite specific to crypto assets, so take heed. This one is take reasonable steps to ensure that crypto assets you provide access to are true to label. That means is, you can't misrepresent or describe the product or a crypto asset in a way that's intended to mislead. Simple falls, otherwise would fall under the framework of the AFSL, like Chris said. The next one is a prohibition on hawking specific crypto assets. So CASSPrs can't offer specific crypto assets for sale, request, or invite a consumer to ask for crypto assets in the course of an unsolicited contact. What's an unsolicited contact? Well, it's just basically any contact that happens in real time when the consumer hasn't consented. But that prohibition won't apply to advertising or the provision of information. That's something we can help work through with you and navigate together. And then finally, maintaining robust custody requirements. And we recognize that having custody of crypto assets is probably going to be a key part of many Web3 businesses. But it's important to note that if you are a CASSPR and you deal directly with the consumer, then it will be your responsibility, and there's a huge onus on you to keep those crypto assets safe, particularly private keys that give access, would grant access to quite significant holdings of crypto assets. And we've seen plenty of hacks and cybersecurity issues arise in this space where people have lost private keys. So even if you outsource that storage, for example, then you're still going to be the first point of responsibility. And that's something we've definitely gleaned from the consultation paper. So I'll dive into the custody standards that have been set out. And I won't go through all of them again, but touch on a few key ones. So first one being, is a requirement to hold assets on trust for the consumer. Now this one's interesting because as a lawyer, we're looking at the language here, holding assets on trust. That to me can potentially imply, probably does imply a stronger legal duty of care under law. So it's something to keep an eye out for. Second one is ensuring that your assets are appropriately segregated. So, each consumer's crypto assets need to be segregated, even down to that granular smart contract level, when you're pulling them into a DeFi protocol, whatever the case may be. And then also keeping your corporate assets separate from the consumer assets, which is a thing here in Australia, but Coinbase actually last week over in the States got into a bit of hot water in relation to that particular issue. Next one, obviously, when you're dealing with private keys, then make sure you're doing the appropriate things and adhering to best industry practice and standards when you're generating and storing those keys. Do it in a way so it minimizes loss, the risk of loss and unauthorized access. So use seed encryption when you're storing keys or seeds. Use fairly strong encryption. Use mechanisms in place to delete or destroy unwanted data in relation to seed key and wallet generation. Do things like disable the internet at that point in time as well. Like I said, having robust cyber and physical security practices will be a really key component, whether it's industry-related approach or a government-imposed regulation. That's something to really keep an eye on, and then also have those practices independently verified by cybersecurity practices. And then finally, when you're outsourcing any work, make sure you do have the ability to go in and vet the custodian's ability to meet those compliance requirements. Make sure they have the systems in place and so forth to be able to actually take and execute your instructions as well. I guess to wrap that up, I've echoed this sentiment a few times, is that we could see something, and we're still in that building phase, like Chris said. Industry can take the lead here, and it can be self-regulating. Blockchain Australia is doing a great job at doing that, as opposed to having something that's quite prescriptive. So watch this space, but understanding the consumer risks, and this is something that's been echoed across other jurisdictions as well, is going to be quite informative as to how you can best prepare yourselves as a business. So with that said, we're going to now move to implications for your business. And I may as well kick it off. The first one is you're going to work out whether or not, for this particular proposed approach, are you going to be a CASSPR? And so feel free to go through the consultation paper, some guidance there, or feel free to re-watch this webinar recording. But I'll hand it over to Chris, who can talk from his deep industry experience and Web3 experience about further implications for your business.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. Absolutely. So once you've figured out whether this might apply to you, the next step would be just figure out what impact this might have on your business and business model. So too often, I work with clients who always try to avoid regulations, particularly the Australian Financial Services laws. And oftentimes, in trying to avoid one set of regulations, you kind of get caught up in another. So my general advice here is to go back to basics. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And how is your proposed solution at least 10 times better than existing solutions? You can use whatever multiple you like, but I'm a Peter Thiel fan. And then, I guess in general, taking that approach will keep you focused and allow you to make the right decisions and stay true to your business's purpose. As opposed to modifying it so much that it looks and feels and does something completely different in the hope of trying to avoid regulations. So there's also some practical guidance which Bobby can talk to. I'll hand it back over to him.
Yeah, that's right, Chris. It's good to keep keep a pulse on what's happening in industry, and we're certainly doing that. So APRA recently published some guidance on outsourcing. And so I'll rip through this quite quickly. The prudential standard, which will be like a gold benchmark, which you can work and strive towards, is APRA CPS 231 for outsourcing. And the next practical one is APRA CPS 234, information security. And that one came to light from that federal court case I mentioned a little bit earlier, due to the cybersecurity breach. And so industry experts have come forward and said that is the gold standard to meet. And I'll just hand it quickly back to risk mitigation, Chris, to do the risk mitigation strategies.
Of course, there are risk mitigation strategies anytime lawyers come up to present. So yeah, we're gonna go through this pretty quickly as well. Basically, there are a few strategies that you can implement to mitigate your regulatory and just general commercial risk. The first being, include adequate disclaimers and terms and conditions with respect to your crypto assets and services. So this will allow you to sort of avoid some of the misleading and deceptive conduct issues in particular. The second, which is quite difficult at the moment, but find appropriate insurance and insure yourself appropriately. Of course, I'm very aware that it's quite difficult to find insurance in this space, but it does exist, and yeah, it's always good practice to do that. The second is, and the third is building to existing high technical and procedural standards. So Bobby touched on this earlier with respect to CPS 231 and 234. Now, while you might not be obligated to build to those standards or operate in accordance with those standards, depending on the type of business that you have, it might be a good idea to, I guess, build to that and allow you to mitigate, your regulatory risk if that was to become an obligation. But in general, it just does set a good standard for how you should operate. And finally, and of course, very conveniently, seek legal advice. This is to not only help you, understand what obligations that you might have, but also in ASIC's info sheet 225, it mentions that if, for example, you are operating a business and you don't think you have any financial services law obligation, you have to be prepared to justify your position. And what better way to justify a position than with a piece of legal advice from lawyers who know what they're talking about. So look, that concludes a lot of the sort of formalities there. So now we're moving on to the next slide. So it looks like we've prepared something for you, sort of like a goodie bag type thing, something for you to walk away with, which is our Web3 and financial products and services fact sheet. Basically, it is a summary of the financial services law sort of framework and some of the key things that might apply to you. So feel free to download that. And a plug, which is we have another webinar coming up in the next couple of days on how to expand your business into a franchise. If you found this quite interesting, then I'm sure you'll find this webinar also interesting as well. My colleagues do an awesome job doing that. So I think that concludes a lot of the formal presentation. Why don't we turn it over to some Q&A?
Yeah, it looks like we've got some good questions come through, Chris. So we'll take on a few of these. They definitely do look quite good. I might take the first one if you don't mind.
Yeah,
So this one is there's quite a handful, actually, quite a mouthful. Are there any known ways in which businesses can design methods for assisting the sharing of assets, resources without needing to take on heavy regulatory risk and or legal compliance through the use of tokenization and other blockchain-enabled technology? So I think the first point is, in relation to that regulatory risk or legal compliance, there is no way to really avoid avoid the regulatory risk and legal compliance. You do have to comply with the laws as a starting point, and then working out what those laws are. But I suppose it's really, your question might be more geared towards, what sort of the efficiencies that you can implement from a business point of view to achieve that and meet those things, because we understand, we deal with it quite a bit. How do we comply? And it's quite an exercise for a business. But I think, taking a step back, we look back to, fundamentals of blockchain technology. Think back to the genesis of smart contracts, 2015 with Ethereum. Smart contracts can be designed, and there are limitations, but there is quite a lot that smart contracts can do, and you can design them with AML, CTF compliance built in, for example. I think another known way in which businesses can do something about this is, have a look at, say, supply chain risks and supply chain management. So, particularly if you look up anything to do with modern slavery as well, you'll see that there's a few private blockchains that have been developed over the last few years, where that technology has enabled businesses and multiple businesses along the supply chain to basically meet those legal compliance needs and requirements in a way that is secure and very transparent as well. And so that's something to look into. And then I think, just thinking out loud here, there's potentially, and you said we do sort of see this as well in this space where you might get a group of companies and they might form a DAO, which is facilitated by a bunch of smart contracts that feeds the data, verifies data on behalf of those companies. And you could see other use cases could be like insurance policies in the form of a token, which I suppose is a smart contract at the end of the day. And when that insurance policy is renewed on a year-by-year basis, it's basically fastened onto the blockchain. And there could be a use case further down the track where the policy itself is built into that token, or stored off the token on a decentralized storage network, which players can access and view. But I think that hopefully that tackles that question. But I might throw it to Chris. Do you have any thoughts on that, or do you want to pick up the next question?
No, I think that's fine. Maybe let's move on to the next question about NFTs, Bobby.
Yeah, sure. So this one's good. So when copyright owners try to license their derivative works to the licensee, that includes the NFT, right? What actually will be licensed? Right to digitize digital image by using blockchain technology, or right to question mark? So we've assisted a few clients with this, actually, and it's, I think, as a lawyer, I'm probably simplifying here, but it really just comes down to the wording. And when this I suppose transaction happens, and you want to have a license agreement which properly sets out what's being licensed to the licensee, you could see wording such as, right to create, mint, publish artwork or digital image into a non-fungible token or using blockchain technology. And it could be for a commercial purpose, or it could be a personal use, or you could even, narrow the scope of that commercial purpose to, magazine, I don't know. Yeah, it's basically down to the wording, but that's where we can assist you as lawyers and draft those contracts and those terms for you. But I think ultimately you want to see something as well that addresses a clause that addresses copyright. So in Australia, it's the copyright that could be licensed to the licensee as well under the Copyright Act. And then you want to potentially see like a waiver of those moral rights under that agreement as well. Chris, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just to summarize that as well, I guess there is an open-ended question for NFTs and what IP rights, I guess, go with the sale of those NFTs. A lot of the time, there's just not clear enough communication or clear enough terms on the sale. So, it's something as simple as identifying what IP rights are being transferred in the sale of the NFT that could, help avoid some of these issues. But we're just not seeing that with a lot of NFT sales, unfortunately. But if you have an NFT-based project, it's important to very clearly state what IP rights are being sold as part of the sale of that NFT.
Yeah,
Cool.
that's a really important point. I just wanted to add just onto that as well. It's when the NFT is being sold, typically it's really just the proprietary rights that go with it to purchase and then sell it. And then how you use that is where this licensing, comes into play. Can you distribute it? For a lot of music artists, for example, with audio NFTs, they'll retain those rights to be able to distribute the music or the song itself. And the owner of the NFT really just purchases it and sells it. And there's a broad spectrum to this. I mean, look at Bored Ape Yacht Club and what the owners of those NFTs can do with that IP. Chris, I think this one is a really good question as well. Potentially for you, looking for information on switching my company to a holding company or even starting an entirely new one. I have a production company, but I'm beginning to venture in the NFT Web3 metaverse phase. I'd like to gain a better sense of setting up my company. So what company structure best suits my new Web3 venture?
Yeah, cool. I think for the remaining time we have, I'll try and rip through these as quickly as possible to answer as many questions as possible. So to answer that one, look, I hate to sound like a lawyer again, but it really does depend on the circumstances and how your business operates. Typically, a good approach would be having a holding company that holds all the IP, but then also another company that is owned by that holding company that does a lot of the services and deals with customers, hires employees, and does all the operations. So it's like an operating entity. But the reason why you do that is for liability purposes, so that most of the liability stays with the operating entity. But again, they could be much more elaborate than that. But yeah, it will depend on your circumstances. All right.
Yeah.
So there's some good questions flowing in as well with respect to AFSL requirements. I'll pick a couple of these. Is it required for you to get an AFSL when using a supplier for crypto payments or functions that, in brackets, that is already licensed with an AFSL on your platform? Okay, so I think the best way to answer that is if you are using a third-party software provider or some third party that is that is operating like a non-cash payment facility and they are licensed to operate that NCP, then you may have to get licensed as well. So subject to some exemptions, of course, you may be providing financial product advice or dealing in a financial product, and those two are two financial services that you might be offering there. So keep that in mind. But there are a number of exemptions to that as well, just a caveat, but it will largely depend on your facts. Cool. All right, let's look at another one. What about launchpads that we find online, like Ethereum launchpad, Binance launchpad, etc.? Do we have to comply with regulations when we raise funding from these launchpads? They do KYC on their own. Okay, great. So oftentimes when you're utilizing these launch pads, the KYC process is maybe done by that third party, and in which case you might sort of not need to do it yourself specifically. But with respect to the launch pads, look, it doesn't matter which launch pad you use. You would, in most cases, need to seek legal advice on whether or not the token that you're issuing or that you're putting up for sale on those launch pads, you have to determine whether or not they are financial products. So that's a kind of key thing that you'll need to do there. And oftentimes, some of these platforms will require you to actually provide that advice to demonstrate that you've actually sought legal advice with respect to that.
I think
Okay.
I'll take one quick one, which is, will added compliance enable insurers to be more comfortable to insure a blockchain technology-based client? What is the intersection between legal requirements and insurers? I think it's funny, insurance, I think, has a bit of a reputation for lagging, but there's the use case here for, I mean, it's a no-brainer really. The blockchain really does, enable insurers to verify data. It's something that's happening already. I think there's a lot of insurtechs that are working in this space. But if you have a look around, I think that's a very, a general, just a sentiment is that, yeah, it definitely should enable insurers to be more comfortable. We're just waiting for the insurers to come to the table, really. And then I think, Chris, we're just running out of time. Finally, where can I get a link to the consultation PP you mentioned? Yeah, easy. Get in touch. We'll definitely get you a link to that paper as well.
I think someone in the team can send over a link to our summary of the consultation paper as well, which should include the link. So feel free to look at some of our articles with respect to that, and maybe someone can drop a link in the chat function as well.
Nice, cool. Nice. Well, look, we're going to start wrapping this up, but if you found today interesting and you want to know more about how LegalVision can assist you, then feel free to get in touch. You can become a LegalVision member, and what that does is it offers you access to over 100 in-house style lawyers to help you with your legal needs, and it's a really proactive way to look at your legal needs as opposed to being reactive, and it's somewhat an all-you-can-eat legal subscription, and what you get out of that is cost certainty as well as legal certainty. There are a few exceptions, but we can talk to you when you do call up. But under that membership, you get a broad range of things. Keep in mind, we are a commercial law firm with various practice areas. So you get unlimited document drafting and reviews. So I mentioned white paper reviews. We can do that for you under that. Terms and conditions, contracts, you can send them in as you go. Unlimited legal advice consultations. So this is where if you have niggling questions like, I want to introduce staking, am I going to be triggering any sort of financial regulatory concerns here? And that's where you can call up and have a high-level discussion with Chris or myself or both of us about what you can do. You get unlimited Australian, New Zealand trademark applications. You get guaranteed quick turnarounds for legal work, so anywhere between 3 to 5 business days, and that's included in your membership package. And so all you need to do is request a complimentary consultation today. You've as a result of attending this webinar, all you have to do is leave your contact details in the survey that will appear after the webinar ends, and also just shoot an email to that email on the screen and mention that you watched the webinar. But just, I guess, to wrap my closing remarks is, it's a very interesting space to be in. There's a lot happening. It moves really, really quickly, and we're certainly keeping an eye on everything going on. Thanks very much for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Don't be shy. Feel free to shout out, get in touch, go for a coffee. Chris and I will obviously be more than happy to chat to you. Chris, did you have any closing remarks?
Yeah, guys, can't thank you enough for joining us today. Again, I know you're all incredibly busy, but we do appreciate you spending your morning with us. Hopefully you were able to take something out of this today. And apologies we couldn't get through all the questions, but I'm sure you can make contact with us, and we'd be happy to have a chat. But yeah, keep building cool stuff, guys, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you around.
And shout out to our clients on the call. Thanks, guys. We love working with you.
See you guys.
See ya.